Hi, and welcome back to How Long with Spot. Um, I wanted to cover today a couple of things about what I call fallacious phraseology, um, particularly two examples, maybe more if we can get to them. Um, One that you hear a lot of these days, a bad apple, and another, um, rising tides. Um, the The example of the bad apple, and when I think of this, most people, when they hear the term bad apple, um, are influenced by a song that came out of the Motown era. Um, One bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch, girls, right? Uh, it was, about an encouragement to, you know, okay, one guy's asshole, there's plenty of fish out in the sea, right? That kind of idea. And you know before that, because of the popularity of that song, I mean, probably the vast amount of Americans have heard that song at least once in their lives. And that's possibly where most people have only actually heard the statement either by that or by a police union. I mean, that's where it comes out of, to these days, because most people don't deal with storing food. Now, I remember back in Philadelphia when we were involved in running a food distribution. Actually, it was two different kinds of food distributions because there are two types of food distributions you can have. You can have an emergency one. This is the idea that, person is living their normal life and something happens, there's a disaster, and they just need emergency help right away. And then they have a supplemental where predictably someone, because their income is too little, um, they need a little help on a regular cyclic basis to get over things. And this was in the 70s. And, there was a tremendous shift in 1970, 1971, 1972, 1973, involving both the conclusion of the Vietnam War, successful revolutions in various places that basically changed the nature of imperialism. And there was actually a document written about that, popular on the left at that time, called The Analysis, that talked about, from this point, to get the vast amounts of profit needed for capitalism to be satisfied, exploitation will have to be shifted from abroad to at home, be necessarily to economically displace some of the middle class. Probably wouldn't have used the term middle class actually, but it would have gone down what they would call the process of re-stratification. And of course, that's exactly what we've seen. That's why there's less of a middle class now. There's less people, because the exploitation had to be shifted. And that's why, you know, the rich have gone richer, poor have gone poorer. The whole disparity in income inequality has grown consistently since that time. And of course, the other factor there was America's peak oil happened in 73, and that's when the Saudis had more oil than Texas. That's when, I mean, that's a simplification. It's good as a joke. Um, and um, let me get back from that little tangent there. So at that time, most food distribution programs are more geared toward the emergency and the idea of a supplemental. And so it was kind of cutting edge to have a supplemental, and that food, most food picked up like on Friday near the end of the week. You know, truck volunteer drivers, all that stuff, pick up all this food, and Friday evening they would have the supplementary food program, and of course you pull out things like canned goods and so forth would store that would be good for the emergency food, and that would be distributed, and what was left, largely a lot of potatoes, onions, breads would be stored to add to the canned goods for the emergency program. And by Monday, you had to go through all the potatoes and all the onions. And if there was a rotten one, you had to pull it out. And particularly with potatoes. Potatoes, you had to pull it out, go through the whole thing, pull it out. And if any of the potatoes around them had any moisture on it, you had to rub that dry and put those potatoes in a used first pile because rot spreads. And I'll tell you, potatoes, apples, that's looking about love. Potatoes, if there's anything bad than a bag full of rotten potatoes, it's a bag full of rotten onions sitting next to a bag full of rotten potatoes because they will actually promote the rotting of the onions near them. And this is the thing, when you see those four cops, three of them kneeling on this guy, and one of them in the crowd, and one of them did do a protest. He's a lower ranking one saying, shouldn't we order, turn the guy over maybe and not kill him, and he's the lowest ranking one. And maybe if that had not have been Cameron, maybe he would have walked out there the next day and say, I think I'm gonna transfer another anything. Now I don't have to work with this asshole again. And still there would be a taint because he would be involved. And so if what you're saying is a bad apple, and we'll say, okay, it's just bad apples. If you're leaving in there for 17, I mean, there was one guy, 80, 70 or 80 complaints against him, who's reacting. And of course, they're the ones who are reacting. And, you know, that rot spreads. So if you're talking about bad apples and you have documented that you're keeping those bad apples for a long time, you're really going to have to dismantle your department because it's like that bag that, yeah, sometimes you get a bag and, these bags, you pull out the quarter of a sack of clean ones, dry them off, and get them out that first Friday night because those ones can't be saved. And that's what that means if you're using that metaphor. The other um, concept there was that concept of rising tides raises all ships. Trickle down bullshit, trickle on stuff is more accurate. Now, the reason a rising tide rises all ships. And I'll say why I've done that. This recently, and I'll put up links about it on the little wording there. But there's been recently a economic report done about covering largely the economic effects of the past few months, and it kind of pretty strongly indicates that the whole stimulation package did hardly nothing. But if you look, the one thing that did make any difference at all was that when those $1,200 checks come out, the spending patterns of low income people increased by 4%, while that of wealthier, more affluent people continued to go down to minus 17. And remember, almost a lot of those wealthy people got that $1,200 check too. It didn't phase them. Of course it didn't. That wasn't the problem, right? They were working from home. They had money to have food delivered to their homes. They had nice homes, lots of room, lots of entertainment, all that stuff. Why should they risk their lives? Of course not, right? People who were desperate to pay bills, they put that money right in. And that's because the reason a rising tide raises all ships is because water seeks its the lowest level. It goes down to the bottom and rises upward from the bottom upward. So the idea of um, using these kinds of phrases for what people feel, but it's separated from a population that doesn't actually know the nut and bolts mechanic of how their world works. That makes these phrases so misleading. And a part of that is because, and sometimes I'm criticized when Elizabeth Spot's household, I use very big words sometimes, and I use very precise words sometimes, but sometimes it's important. This is a epistemology. It's how you know what you know. And we wrote about this earlier today on something else that, Ezra Brooks, or excuse me, Ezra Pound was Hitler's poet, just like Albert Speers was Hitler's architect. And the part of that is because it was a postmodernist idea of dealing with the idea that it rejects facts, that I can't understand what you really meant to say truly without being you, and therefore I should just read what you say based on being me. And I've met postmodernists, they read something by looking for words they recognize and what that feels to them, and then go off by saying words that express their feelings. And, there are historians who will actually go on this way. And now you can see that in Trump. I mean, that's what Trump is. What does he say? He says whatever sounds good to his ears. And he says it based on what's in his guts. And of course, his limited vocabulary separates him from Ezra Pound, but it's that same thinking that facts don't matter. And this is not Trump. This is not. This has gone long before that. This goes with a lot of the pseudo-electionals out there. So next time someone gives you a phrase that's based on a mechanical process to incite a reaction in your body or mind to respond to a certain idea, as silly as it seems, take a thought or two into what would actually be involved in that physical example and see if they're talking to your mind or your emotions. Uh, Subscribe if you like if you like, and I'll post those links.